Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a book that honestly feels essential. It's one of those texts that really explores human resilience, the search for hope in the darkest places. We're diving into Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
It really is foundational, isn't it? Widely known, maybe quoted a lot, but the depth, sometimes that gets missed.
Okay.
And the sheer impact Frankl himself mentioned, over 4 million copies sold just in English during his lifetime.
Wow, 4 million?
Yeah, but here's the thing. He didn't see that as, a measure of his own success. He actually called it an expression of the misery of our time.
The misery of our time.
Meaning that so many people buying it showed how widespread that burning question was. What is the meaning of life? It was like a collective cry for help.
Okay, that puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
So let's lay out our approach here. We're going to follow Frankl's structure, really connect the two main parts of the book.
Right. Part one is his own story, incredibly raw and harrowing, about being prisoner number 119,104 in 4 different Nazi concentration camps, Auschwitz among them.
And then part 2 builds directly on that experience. It's where he lays out logotherapy, the school of psychotherapy he founded.
Exactly. And it's crucial to see part 1 as the existential bedrock for part 2.
Mm-hmm.
He lived the theory before he fully articulated it. It wasn't abstract thinking. It came straight out of surviving absolute horror.
So the experience validates the theory.
Precisely. And that gives logotherapy its unique place. It's known as the third Viennese school of psychotherapy, right after Freud and Adler.
Right, and Freud, his big thing was the will to pleasure, basically. Then Adler came along and shifted it to the will to power.
Correct. But Frankl steps aside from both. He argues that the most fundamental, the primary human motivation isn't pleasure or power. It's the will to meaning.
The drive to find a purpose in your own life.
Yes. And not just a drive, but the drive, according to him. If you don't get that, he suggests, you're missing something fundamental about being human. So our deep dive today is really about exploring that claim, seeing how he backs it up.
Okay, so to really understand this will to meaning, we have to go there, into the camps with him. He breaks down the inmate's psychological journey into 3 phases. Let's start with phase 1, the shock of arrival.
Yeah, the admission phase. And paradoxically, he says it often started with this profound self-deception he calls the delusion of reprieve.
Delusion of reprieve? How so?
Well, think about it. People crammed onto those cattle cars, sometimes 1,500 people, enduring days of squalor. Yet many clung to the hope, right up until the last second, that maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe it was just a work camp, a munitions factory, anything but death.
Holding on to any sliver of hope they could find.
Exactly, until they saw the sign, Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And then came the selection. Frankl paints this absolutely terrifying picture, lining up, filing past an SS officer.
And the officer just casually pointing.
Left
or right.
with this sort of bored flick of the finger.
Yeah.
Left
Right.
or right. And that single gesture, completely indifferent, decided everything for 90% of the people on that transport.
90%.
Right.
Left meant.
Left meant the gas chambers, the crematorium. You were dead within hours. Right meant temporary survival, forced labor, starvation, brutality.
Mm-hmm.
But survival for a time.
The sheer randomness of it, the casual power.
It's the first brutal confrontation with existence stripped bare.
Yeah.
And the full horror, the meaning of that finger game, as he calls it, wasn't even clear immediately.
No.
Not until later that evening, he says, when someone pointed towards the chimney in the distance, with this sinister column of smoke rising against the sky, that's when the delusion shattered completely.
God, that's chilling.
But Frankl pinpoints a moment before that, a personal moment of psychological surrender that was maybe even more devastating for him.
What was that?
He'd managed to keep his life's work, the manuscript for his first book on psychotherapy, hidden in his coat pocket. He desperately wanted to save it. So he asked a seasoned prisoner, is there any chance?
He asked if he could keep his manuscript in Auschwitz.
Yes. And the response from this prisoner, who'd seen it all, it was just one word.
What did he say?
Shit.
Just...
That single, brutal word, it just wiped away everything. His profession, his identity, his entire past life, his hopes tied to that work. Meaningless in that context. Frankl said that was the moment he truly understood he had to strike out his whole former life.
Nothing left but bare existence.
His so ridiculously naked life, as he put it, stripped of everything. And that leads into the second phase he describes, which lasted much longer, apathy.
Apathy. Not just being tired, but like an emotional death.
Exactly. A necessary one, he argues. A kind of protective shell against the constant, overwhelming horror and disgust.
How did that manifest?
Well, physically, the degeneration was extreme. The rations were pathetic, watery soup, a tiny bit of bread, nowhere near enough calories for hard labor in the cold. So the mind just narrowed.
Focused on survival.
Absolutely, and primarily focused on food. Obsessively. He talks about endless conversations, imagining favorite meals, arguing about the best way to eat the bread ration.
Eat it all now or save a crumb for later. That agonizing choice.
Every single day. That physical struggle directly fueled the emotional blunting, the constant exposure to death, to suffering, to brutality. You just couldn't feel it all the time. You break.
So the apathy was a kind of defense mechanism.
A crucial one. He gives us a really stark example. He was sick with typhus, lying in a hut. He watched as a fellow inmate died right there.
Watched him die.
Yes. And then immediately, other prisoners descended. One took the dead man's scraps of food, another grabbed his worn-out shoes, someone else took a piece of string he had. Then they dragged the body out, its head bumping horribly on the steps.
And Frankl.
He just kept sipping his soup. Felt nothing. No horror, no pity, no disgust. Just unconcerned.
It sounds inhuman, but you can see how it would be necessary to survive that.
It was the only way to preserve the self, to focus purely on the next moment, the next tiny chance of survival. But this apathy, it had a dark side too.
Which was?
When it tipped over into a complete loss of the will to live, Frankl said you could often tell when someone had given up entirely. They had smoked their own cigarettes.
Smoke their own cigarettes. Why was that a sign?
Because cigarettes were currency. Extremely valuable. You could trade them for a life-saving bowl of soup, maybe some other necessity.
Yeah.
If a man started smoking his own, it meant he no longer believed he'd need that future soup. He'd lost faith in his ability to carry on. It was often the last stage before death. Frankl himself resolved never to run into the wire, the camp term for suicide.
So, amid this stripping away, this apathy, this constant threat of death, where does the meaning come in?
Well, that's the paradox, isn't it? Because Frankl observed something else happening simultaneously. Alongside the primitive regression, there was this surprising intensification of inner life. Spiritual life, intellectual life.
Really? In those conditions?
Yes, and that is the empirical ground for logotherapy. He realized that even when everything external is taken away, your possessions, your health, your name, your loved ones, one thing remains.
What's that?
The last of the human freedoms. He often quoted Nietzsche here. He who has a why to live can bear with almost anyhow.
The freedom to choose your attitude?
Exactly. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That freedom, he insisted, cannot be taken away. It's what makes us human.
And how did he see that freedom exercised?
Most profoundly, through love. He describes these forced marches, freezing cold, dark, stumbling, guards shouting, just utter misery. And he started thinking intensely about his wife.
Visualizing her.
More than just visualizing. He felt her presence, heard her answering him, saw her smile. It was incredibly vivid, almost spiritual. And in that moment, this truth hit him with immense force.
Which was?
The salvation of man is through love and in love.
Wow, even there.
Even there. And what's crucial is how he experienced it. He didn't know if his wife was alive or dead. He had no way to find out. But it didn't matter at that moment.
It didn't matter.
In a way, no. The strength of his love, the reality of her spiritual presence, transcended her physical existence. Love, he realized, finds its deepest meaning in the other's inner self, their spiritual being. Whether the person is physically present or even alive, somehow becomes secondary.
That inner connection gave his suffering meaning.
Unconditional meaning. It proved his life still held purpose. They also found refuge in other things, like appreciating art. Even a sunset seen through the barracks window could be a moment of profound beauty. And, surprisingly, humor.
Humor. In a concentration camp.
Sounds grotesque, doesn't it? But they had these cabaret nights, grim performances, jokes, songs, anything to help them forget, even for a few minutes. Frankl even talks about intentionally trying to cultivate a sense of humor with a friend by making up funny stories about what life would be like after liberation. Like imagining a surgeon back in practice, still so conditioned by the camp that when an orderly roughed in shouting, "Action, action," the camp term for starting work, the surgeon would react as if back on the apple plots.
Finding absurdity in the horror.
Yes. He saw humor as a vital weapon of the soul in its fight for self-preservation. It creates a little bit of distance, allows you to rise above the situation, if only for an instant.
This all points towards his idea about the relativity of suffering, doesn't it?
Absolutely. His point is that suffering, subjectively, fills the human soul entirely, regardless of its objective size. You can't really compare suffering quantitatively. What matters is how it's experienced.
So small things could bring immense joy because the baseline was so low?
Exactly. That explains moments of intense relief that seemed disproportionate. Like the story of the train transport leaving Auschwitz. Everyone was terrified they were heading to Mauthausen, known for his gas ovens.
Okay.
But then they realized the train wasn't going towards Mauthausen. It was heading towards Dachau. Now, Dachau was still horrific, but it didn't have a gas oven facility quite like Mauthausen, or at least not one visible from the track like Auschwitz.
So only Dachau.
Only Dachau. And Frankl describes the prisoners breaking into a spontaneous dance of joy inside the cattle car.
Celebrating going to Dachau, it's hard to wrap your head around.
It shows how relative happiness becomes. They weren't happy, but the absence of the absolute worst horror felt like an incredible gift in that moment.
But there's a dark flip side to survival too, isn't there? He makes a pretty chilling statement about who made it out.
He does. He says, very bluntly, the best of us did not return.
The best didn't return, meaning
Meaning that survival, especially over years in that system, often required a certain ruthlessness, a willingness to push others aside, maybe steal food, betray someone, become brutal like the guards, anything to survive. Those who held on to their scruples, their decency, often didn't last. It was a terrible kind of self-selection.
So it comes back to choice again. Even in the worst circumstances, people chose different paths.
Exactly. That's the key takeaway from part one. You strip people down to nothing, and you don't get a uniform gray mass. You get extremes. People become, as he put it, like swine or like saints. It proved to him, beyond any doubt, that humans retain that ultimate freedom to choose their response, to define themselves.
In that experience, witnessing both the depths and the heights of human behavior under duress, it just didn't fit with existing psychological models.
No. Any theory that couldn't account for the person who chooses dignity, chooses sacrifice, even when it means death, well, that theory was incomplete. And that's the bridge. That's why he needed to develop logotherapy.
Right, so moving from that crucible of experience into the theory itself, logotherapy. We've established the core concept. The primary drive is the will to meaning, not pleasure, not power. But why is that so definitive? Couldn't finding meaning just be a fancy way we rationalize our survival instincts?
That's a fair question, and it's precisely what Frankl addresses. He argues very strongly that meaning is not just some secondary rationalization. If it were, how would you explain people, both inside and outside extreme situations, who willingly endure suffering, hardship, even death, for the sake of an ideal, for a value?
Martyrs, heroes, activists.
Exactly. People live and die for things that have nothing to do with Freudian pleasure principles or Adlerian power struggles. They do it for meaning. So he says meaning has to be primary.
And he saw evidence for this in everyday life too, right? Not just extreme cases.
Yes. He points to studies, like polls of American students back then. Something like 78% said that finding a purpose and meaning to my life was more important to them than making a lot of money.
So even when basic needs are met, the search for meaning often comes out on top.
That's his point. And when that search, that fundamental drive, gets blocked or frustrated, that's when you see problems arise. He calls this existential frustration.
And this existential frustration can lead to actual psychological issues.
Yes, it can lead to what he termed neugenic neuroses.
Okay, neugenic. Need to break that down. It comes from nous, meaning mind or spirit.
Precisely. So these aren't neuroses rooted in the psychological dimension, which is all about drives, instincts, childhood conflicts, the stuff Freud focused on. Neugenic neuroses stem from the neurological dimension. They come from spiritual or existential problems.
Conflicts of values, frustration about meaninglessness.
Exactly. Problems related to the human spirit's search for meaning. And this is a really important distinction, especially for therapy.
Because you might misdiagnose someone, like that American diplomat story he tells.
That's the perfect example. This high-ranking diplomat was deeply unhappy with his career, suffering significant distress. He spent 5 years in classical psychoanalysis.
5 years.
5 years trying to uncover the root cause. The analysis focused on his supposed unconscious hatred of his father, projecting that onto his superiors, a classic psychodynamic explanation.
But that wasn't it.
According to Frankl, no. When the diplomat finally consulted him, Frankl quickly saw that the man wasn't suffering from a deep-seated psychological conflict in the Freudian sense. His will to meaning was simply frustrated by his chosen career. He didn't hate his father. He hated his job because it felt meaningless to him.
So he didn't need more analysis of his past. He needed
a different life path, a vocation that aligned with his values.
Yeah.
The previous therapy failed because it treated an existential problem as if it were purely a psychological one.
It pathologized his search for meaning.
Exactly. Frankl insists that not all suffering indicates a mental illness. Sometimes suffering is just part of the human condition, part of wrestling with life's big questions. But
Mm.
if that frustration persists, if the will to meaning remains blocked, then you get this widespread modern problem he called the existential vacuum.
Existential vacuum sounds empty.
It is. He saw it as a major issue of the 20th century, stemming from a kind of double loss. First, humans, unlike animals, don't have strong instincts telling us exactly what we must do. We have drives, yes, but we also have choice.
Okay, loss of instinctual certainty. What's the second loss?
The rapid decline of tradition. In the past, traditions, social norms, and values gave people a strong sense of what they ought to do. They provided structure and direction.
But as those traditions weakened,
People were left in a lurch. Instinct doesn't tell them what to do. Tradition no longer tells them what they should do, and often, Frankl says, they don't even know what they deep down wish to do.
leaving a void, a
Mhm.
vacuum.
Precisely. And into that vacuum rush, unhealthy substitutes. Frankl identifies two main reactions. One is conformism.
Just doing what everyone else is doing.
Yes, if you don't know what you want, you just copy the crowd. The other reaction is totalitarianism.
Doing what powerful figures tell you to do.
Exactly. Surrendering your freedom and responsibility to an authority figure or ideology because the emptiness and the burden of choice are too much to bear.
And this vacuum shows up in people's lives as what? Specific symptoms?
Oh, definitely. Things like chronic boredom. He specifically talked about Sunday neurosis.
Sunday neurosis.
Yeah, that feeling of depression or unease that hits people on their day off when the frantic pace of the work week stops, and suddenly they're confronted with the emptiness inside, the lack of purpose in their lives.
I think we can all relate to that feeling sometimes.
It's very common. Other symptoms he linked to the existential vacuum include aggression, violence, and addiction. He cited studies suggesting huge percentages of alcoholics and drug addicts, like 90% or even 100%. In some studies, he mentioned, suffered from a profound sense of meaninglessness,
They're trying to fill the void.
trying to fill the void with substances or destructive behaviors because the lack of meaning is so painful. So if meaning involves striving, searching, it implies that logotherapy isn't aiming for a totally calm, tension-free state, is it?
That seems counterintuitive. Don't most therapies aim for reducing stress and tension?
Many do, focusing on achieving homeostasis, a state of equilibrium. But Frankl argued against that. He introduced the concept of noodynamics.
Noodynamics, meaning dynamics of the spirit.
Essentially, yes. He believed that mental health isn't found in a tensionless state, but rather in the tension that exists between what a person has already achieved and what they still ought to accomplish. It's the gap between what one is and what one should become.
So tension is actually healthy, necessary.
A certain kind of tension, yes. The tension related to striving towards a worthwhile goal, a meaning that you've chosen or discovered. He explicitly states that this spiritual tension is essential for psychological well-being. Lack of it leads to the vacuum.
He used an analogy for this, didn't he? Something about architecture.
He did a great one. He said, think of an architect trying to strengthen a sagging arch. What do? They don't take weight off it. They actually increase the load on top. That increased pressure forces the parts of the arch to join together more firmly, making it stronger.
So the therapist's job isn't always to make things easier, but maybe to challenge the person.
To challenge them with a potential meaning to fulfill, a task waiting for them. Not to shy away from confronting them with their responsibilities and the meaning they could create.
And he saw this work in his own life, in the camp.
Absolutely. He recounts being severely ill with typhus in one of the later camps. He was near collapse. But then he started getting tiny scraps of paper and trying to reconstruct his lost manuscript from Auschwitz, jotting down notes for his theory.
Rebuilding his life's work.
That sense of purpose, that task waiting for him, that meaning yet to be realized, he credits that striving, that tension between his desperate situation and his future goal with helping him survive the physical crisis. It literally pulled him through.
That's incredible. So all of this leads to a pretty fundamental shift in perspective, doesn't it? About life itself.
A complete reversal, really. He argues we need to stop asking the question, what do I expect from life? That question keeps us focused on ourselves, our desires, our frustrations.
And
Instead, we need to recognize that life is asking something of us. Every day, every hour, life is posing questions. And our answer doesn't come through abstract thought or philosophical debate.
it comes through action.
Through right action and in right conduct. Responsibility, he says, is the very essence of human existence. We are responsible for finding and fulfilling the unique meaning of our own lives.
Which brings us to that really intense categorical imperative of logotherapy. Can you remind us what that is?
It's a powerful thought experiment designed to hammer home this sense of responsibility. He says, live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you're about to act now.
Wow. Okay, break that down. Live as if you're getting a second chance.
But also as if you already messed up badly the first time, right at the point where you're about to make your current choice. It forces you to confront the potential negative consequences of your actions before you act.
So it emphasizes the finality of your choices, but also the possibility of choosing better now.
Precisely. It maximizes your awareness of the responsibility you hold in each moment. And fulfilling that responsibility requires looking beyond yourself. This ties into his critique of the modern obsession with self-actualization.
Right, the idea that the goal of life is to find yourself or become your best self. Frankl wasn't a fan.
He wasn't against self-actualization itself, but he saw it as a byproduct, not the goal. You don't achieve it by aiming for it directly.
How do you achieve it then?
By forgetting yourself, by dedicating yourself to a cause greater than yourself, or to loving another person. Self-actualization happens spontaneously when you're focused on serving something or someone beyond your own ego. It requires self-transcendence.
Okay, so life is questioning us, demanding responsible action and self-transcendence. But how do we find the answers? How do we discover that meaning? Frankl outlines 3 main paths, right?
Yes, he boils it down to 3 fundamental avenues where meaning can be found. The first one is perhaps the most obvious: creating a work or doing a deed.
Achievement, contribution, building something, solving a problem, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Making your unique mark on the world through action. The second avenue is experiencing something or encountering someone.
Like experiencing beauty, nature, art, or connecting with another person.
Precisely. Experiencing goodness, truth, or beauty. And the pinnacle of this avenue, for Frankl, is love.
We talked about how central love was for him in the camp, seeing the potential in the other person.
Yes. Love allows you to grasp the very core of another human being, their essential nature, and crucially, their potential. By seeing that potential, you actually help the beloved person to achieve it. Love isn't just a feeling, it's an act that enables growth. Again, it's about transcending the self.
Okay, so work deeds and experiences love. What's the third avenue? This feels like the one most directly validated by his camp experience.
It is. The third way is found in the attitude taken toward unavoidable suffering.
Unavoidable suffering. This is tough because our instinct is always to eliminate suffering.
And Frankl agrees. If suffering can be avoided, like suffering caused by injustice or illness, then the meaningful response is to fight its cause. But if you're faced with a situation you truly cannot change, a fate that's unavoidable.
Like a terminal illness or an irreparable loss.
Exactly. Then the challenge shifts. You can no longer change the situation, but you can change yourself. You can choose your attitude towards that suffering. And in doing so, you can transform a personal tragedy into a triumph of the human spirit.
How does that work? How does an attitude change suffering?
He says, suffering ceases to be suffering, in a way, the moment it finds a meaning. Often that meaning is the meaning of a sacrifice. The classic illustration is his story about the elderly doctor.
Right, the doctor who was devastated, couldn't get over the death of his wife.
Completely inconsolable after 2 years. Frankl didn't offer platitudes. He asked him a simple, perspective-shifting question. Doctor, what would have happened if you had died first and your wife had had to survive you?
And the doctor said, oh, that would have been terrible for her. She would have suffered so much.
Exactly. And then Frankl delivered the key insight. You see, doctor, such suffering has been spared her, and it was you who have spared her this suffering.
Wow.
To be sure, Frankl continued, at the price that now you have to survive and mourn her. In that instant, the doctor's perspective shifted. His grief wasn't just pointless agony anymore.
It became meaningful. It was the price he paid to spare his beloved wife that same pain. A sacrifice.
Precisely. The suffering itself didn't disappear, but its meaning changed entirely. And that transformation allowed him to bear it. It became an achievement, albeit a painful one.
That reframing is incredibly powerful. So, logotherapy isn't just about finding meaning in general. It also has specific techniques for psychological problems. You mentioned paradoxical intention.
Yes, it's one of logotherapy's main techniques, particularly for phobias and obsessive-compulsive disorders. It works on 2 related ideas. First, that fear produces that which one is afraid of.
Like worrying about blushing makes you blush.
Exactly. That's called anticipatory anxiety. And second, the idea of hyperintention, which means that trying too hard to do something or trying too hard not to do something you fear often makes it impossible.
Like trying desperately to fall asleep just keeps you awake.
Perfect example. So paradoxical intention flips this on its head. Instead of fighting the fear or the symptom, the therapist encourages the patient to actually intend to do the very thing they fear, often with humor.
To try to do what scares them. How does that help?
By deliberately intending the symptom, you detach from it. You take the wind out the sails of the anticipatory anxiety. The fear feeds on avoidance and fighting. When you paradoxically embrace it, the cycle breaks. Humor is key here, too. It helps create that detachment.
Can you give an example? You mentioned the sweating physician earlier.
Right. This doctor had a terrible fear of sweating in social situations, and the fear itself made him sweat profusely. Standard treatments failed. Frankl told him, next time you feel anxious, don't try not to sweat. Instead, resolve to show people just how much you can sweat. Decide you're going to pour at least 10 quarts.
He told him to try to sweat more.
Yes, paradoxically and humorously. And by ironically trying to produce the symptom he feared, the patient found he couldn't. The hyperintention to sweat undermined the anxiety that actually caused it. He was apparently cured very quickly.
That's fascinating, using the intention against itself. Does it work for other things?
Frankl reported success with things like stuttering. He told the story of a stutterer who was asked to demonstrate his stutter and found he couldn't do it on demand. Also, writer's cramp, instructing the patient to intentionally try to write as badly and illegibly as possible, which they then found they couldn't do.
So you short-circuit the anxiety loop. What about the opposite problem? Not trying too hard, but thinking too much.
Yes. That's where the second main technique comes in, dereflection. This targets hyperreflection, excessive self-observation or self-consciousness.
Focusing too much on yourself and how you're doing.
Exactly. Just as hyperintention interferes with automatic processes, so does hyperreflection. The classic example is sexual performance anxiety.
If someone is constantly monitoring their own arousal or worrying about achieving orgasm,
It often prevents it from happening naturally. Pleasure and orgasm, Frankl argued, are inherently spontaneous. They have to be side effects. They can't be the direct goal of intense focus. If you focus too much on yourself, you kill the experience.
so dereflection aims to
Shift the focus away from the self and towards something else. In the case of sexual issues, it means focusing on the partner, on giving pleasure, on the connection, rather than on one's own performance.
get out of your own head.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Redirect attention outward. More broadly, it means finding something meaningful outside yourself to focus on, engaging with the world, with tasks, with other people. Again, it comes back to that core principle of self-transcendence.
Forget yourself in dedication to something else.
Exactly. Whether you're overcoming fear with paradoxical intention or overcoming self-consciousness with dereflection, the underlying cure involves looking beyond the self towards meaning.
Okay, we've covered the avenues to meaning and some specific techniques. This brings us to a really culminating idea in Frankl's work, the concept of tragic optimism. It sounds like a contradiction in terms.
It does, doesn't it? But it's central to logotherapy's view of life. Frankl acknowledged what he called the tragic triad, the unavoidable realities of human existence: pain, guilt, and death.
Things nobody can escape entirely.
Right. And tragic optimism isn't about pretending these things don't exist or aren't painful. It's about maintaining optimism, saying yes to life in spite of them. It's about finding meaning even within the tragic aspects of life.
How do you do that? How do you find meaning in pain, guilt, and death?
Logotherapy proposes specific ways to transform each element of the triad. First, tuning pain into an achievement. We saw this with the doctor mourning his wife. His suffering became a meaningful sacrifice. Frankl also mentioned examples like Vietnam POWs who reported significant personal growth resulting from their ordeal.
Finding strength through adversity.
Exactly. Second, turning guilt into an opportunity for change. Guilt over past wrongdoings isn't just something to be suppressed or explained away by background factors.
Like he told the prisoners at San Quentin.
Yes, he challenged them to take responsibility for their actions, no matter their circumstances. And crucially, to see their guilt not as a final condemnation, but as a starting point for genuine change, for becoming a better person. Deriving from guilt, the impetus to transform oneself.
Taking responsibility allows for change.
It's the precondition for change. And third, turning death, or life's transitoriness, into an incentive for responsible action.
The fact that life is finite shouldn't lead to despair, but urgency.
Urgency and appreciation. Because our time is limited, every moment counts. Every choice matters. Instead of seeing death as something that negates meaning, Frankl saw it as something that creates meaning by demanding that we use our limited time well.
He had that analogy about the calendar, didn't
A
he?
beautiful one. The pessimist looks at the calendar getting thinner day by day and feels only loss, only the approach of the end.
But the activist.
The person living actively and responsibly takes each page as it's turned, files it away carefully, maybe jots down notes about what they accomplished that day, the experiences they had, the choices they made.
So the past isn't gone, it's stored.
Irrevocably stored and treasured. That's his phrase. What you have lived, loved, suffered bravely, that becomes a permanent reality in your past. It can't be taken away.
Which leads to that surprising view on old age.
Yes. He argued that the old shouldn't be pitied. In fact, the young should almost envy them. Because the young person has only possibilities, potentialities. The old person has realities stored in their past. The work's done, the love experienced, the suffering overcome. They have harvested the meanings of their lives.
That's a radically different way of looking at aging.
It is. And this entire framework, tragic optimism, the value of the past, it rests on a fundamental rejection of what Frankl called pandeterminism.
Pandeterminism. The idea that we're completely determined by forces outside our control.
Exactly. The belief that a human being is nothing but the result of biological factors, genes, psychological factors, drives, conditioning, and sociological factors, environment, upbringing. That there's no real freedom, no genuine choice.
But Frankl, having lived through the ultimate determining conditions in the camps,
Became the staunchest opponent of that view. His own experience screamed the opposite. He saw people facing the exact same horrific conditions react in vastly different ways.
some became saints, some became swine.
That's his stark phrasing. The conditions influenced them, pushed them, tormented them, but the conditions did not determine their ultimate response. Man, he insisted, always retains the freedom to take a stand toward the conditions, to choose his attitude, to decide what kind of person he will be.
Even in the face of death.
Even then, that final freedom can never be extinguished. He tells anecdotes about people comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. Those actions were choices, not determined responses. Man ultimately decides for himself.
This freedom makes people unpredictable then.
Fundamentally unpredictable. He mentions a notorious Nazi doctor known as the mass murderer of Steinhoff, who, after the war in a Russian POW camp, apparently became a model comrade, utterly transformed. You can never write someone off completely because the potential for change, for choosing differently, always exists.
And this belief in inherent freedom and dignity underpins his whole approach to mental health, his psychiatric credo.
Yes. It's the belief that even someone suffering from severe, incurable psychosis still retains the full dignity of a human being. They are not just a broken machine. Why? Because being human is more than just having a functioning psyche or being useful to society.
There's that spiritual dimension, the news.
Exactly. That core of freedom and potential meaning exists even when the psychological or biological functions are impaired. Denying that dignity opens the door to justifying horrific things, like euthanasia based on perceived uselessness. Logotherapy aims to rehumanize psychiatry by always recognizing that indestructible spiritual core.
It all comes back to that ultimate potential within each person for good or ill, which makes his final quote so powerful.
Incredibly powerful, tying together the extremes he witnessed. Since Auschwitz, we know what man is capable of.
The depths of cruelty and indifference.
And since Hiroshima, we know what is at stake.
The potential for self-destruction on a massive scale if we lose sight of meaning and responsibility. The stakes couldn't be higher. What a journey. From the depths of Auschwitz to a philosophy of hope and meaning. It's profound. I think for you, listening, the absolute core takeaway from Frankl is this. Life holds a potential meaning, an unconditional meaning that persists no matter what life throws at you.
That's it. And knowing your why, finding that meaning, gives you the strength to endure almost anyhow. It's not about avoiding suffering, it's about finding purpose within it, or in spite of it.
And thinking about today, about that existential vacuum, Frankl described the boredom, the anxiety, the searching. His concept of no dynamics feels incredibly relevant.
It really does. That idea that we need healthy tension. We shouldn't be aiming for a life free of all striving, all challenges. That comfort, that ease can actually lead straight into meaninglessness.
The cure isn't relaxation, it's dedication.
Dedication to something worthwhile, something that pulls you forward, something bigger than yourself. Embracing that gap between who you are and who you could be through responsible action.
So the final thought we want to leave you with is really Frankl's challenge reflected back at you. Are you actively seeking and engaging with that necessary meaning-giving tension in your life?
Or are you perhaps consciously or unconsciously avoiding it? Maybe through conformity, distraction, seeking easy pleasure, trying to fill that inner vacuum with things that can't ultimately satisfy it. Finding and committing to your unique tasks, your unique meaning, that's the lifelong project Frankl sets before us.